Good evening. Thank you so much. It's so nice to see such a full room here. Thank you so much to everyone for coming. My name is Jacquelyn Zong-Li Ross, and I'm the art editor of the Capilano Review. I'm very honored to have the pleasure of welcoming you tonight to Dear Friends and our monthly reading series, now back for a second season. Thank you to the BC Arts Council for its inaugural support of this program, to our friends at Western Front who've continued to believe in and support this collaboration, and of course to all of you who've continued to show up with us month after month in person here at Western Front or virtually by live stream. We're so glad that you're here. We're gathered here tonight on the unceded ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples, nations who have been living, creating, and gathering in community on this land since time immemorial. As we witness the immense violence, genocide, and land theft that is ongoing in Gaza, we're also thinking deeply as an organization about what it means to be doing this work of art making and sharing, this work of publishing, as an organization primarily run by settlers within the violent context of settler colonialism and all of its reverberations, from Palestine to so-called Canada. We stand behind the belief that poetry and art have the capacity to hold space for actions of protest and solidarity, for expressions of outrage and grief, and provisions of a future of our refashioning. So if you're not familiar with the Capilano Review, we are a 52-year-old nonprofit literary and visual arts journal based here in Vancouver. Originally founded by artist Pierre Coupé at Capilano College in 1972, the Review left what is now Capilano University in 2015 to become a fully independent publication and registered charity. Dedicated to experimentation across boundaries, forms, and contexts, with particular emphasis on promoting dialogue between the literary and visual arts, each issue of the Review features poetry, fiction, essays, interviews, criticism, art folios, and artist projects by local contributors and others, both emerging and established from our wider geographic networks. Alongside our publishing program, we also partner with other organizations in the city, like Western Front, to offer a variety of year-round public programs, including the monthly reading series, of course, that you are attending tonight, an annual writer-in-residence program, and numerous writing contests, workshops, and educational initiatives. So all this being said, our work as a community-driven platform is never without its fair dose of precarity. Even as our small magazine has made incredible strides in recent years, and even as it remains as vital and as vibrant as ever, we will still need to raise an additional $40,000 by the end of this year just to balance our budgets. So if you value literary programming like this in your city and you appreciate the work we do both on and off the page, we invite you to consider extending your support for the Capilano Review before you leave this evening, either by purchasing a $35 print subscription to the magazine or by making a direct donation to become a listed friend of TCR. Our managing editor, Catherine, will be happy to chat with you or assist you at our book table beside the bar. And of course, if you're not able to assist in any of these ways, we would still appreciate if you could consider sharing the magazine with your friends and family or bringing them along with you to one of these events. So as the first event of this season, we're also delighted to welcome resident artist Jonathan Alfaro, who's with us tonight. Hi, Jonathan, where are you? Hey, thank you so much. Jonathan's paintings, which are also featured in our latest issue of the Capilano Review, right here, reflect on relationships between drawing and writing, care, and correspondence. Jonathan has produced a new series of monotype prints entitled Daylight Lover, especially for this program, inspired by the imagined flourishes that might be found in the margins of love letters. We'll be featuring a new work from this series at each of the season's 5 reading events this year. So thank you, Jonathan, for bringing your work into the reading space. Thank you so much. And the first work in the series, on view tonight behind me, is titled Red Sweater Perfume. So just a few more remarks. I'd like to extend a huge thank you to Western Front for being such a generous and supportive partner with us on this series, and in particular to Susan Gibb and Kiel Torres, who co-organized the series with myself and literary editor Deanna Fong, technical manager Ben Wilson at the back, videographer Quilly Wu, and photographer Dennis Ha. I'd also like to thank Managing Editor Catherine Gear-Chambers, who's been at the book table all evening long, and BC Arts Council for its generous support of our out-of-town authors. So some quick housekeeping before we get on with things. So each of our 3 readers tonight will be presenting for 20 minutes with no intermission. 2 all-gender washrooms are located downstairs in the foyer, as the washroom on this floor is unfortunately closed for renovations. We also acknowledge that this physical space is not currently wheelchair accessible. So to everyone currently attending by live stream, thank you so much for being patient with us while we continue to work through the necessary steps to make a large-scale upgrade to this historic building a reality. With that, I'm going to invite Kiel Torres to introduce our first reader. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming tonight. Yoon Sook Cha is a writer and photographer working on the unceded and ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. She received her PhD from the Department of Rhetoric at the University of California, Berkeley. She was a postdoctoral fellow in the program for structured liberal education at Stanford University and an artist at the Winter Writers Residency 2023 at the Banff Centre for the Arts and Creativity. Her published work includes Decreation and the Ethical Bind, Simone Weil and the Claim of the Other, which was published in 2017 by Fordham University Press. I was first introduced to Yoon Sook's work last winter here in the Lux when she was joined by Lisa Robertson for a conversation on the work of Simone Weil. Together, they unpacked Weil's concept of force and the potential held in its refusal, questioning how new vocabularies of resistance can emerge from expressions of love and consent, which is a mode of language and a way of being that feels especially resonant in our present moment. She is currently working on Grief Cycles 1, 2, and 3, a hybrid text and installation that utilizes poetry, sound, and photography to inscribe and reiterate subjects of grief at the site of their erasure. And when I encountered poems from the sprawling project in the spring issue of the Capilano Review, Yoon Sook, I was so taken by your delicate handling of emotion and time through these haunting vignettes that weave together the ephemera of life into a continuum that simultaneously unravels itself. We'll have the pleasure of hearing from this project tonight, so without further ado, please join me in welcoming Yoon Sook Cha.
Thank you, Jackie, and thank you, Kiel, for organizing tonight's program. I'm deeply honored to be reading in this illustrious hall with Francesca Bennett and with Zoe Imani Sharpe. I think that some of the most beautiful things happen or begin in conversation, in an address to dear friends and I like the end of that. I like its suggestion that the address might continue, be taken up, renewed again, and then perhaps again. Of course, when we're talking about renewal and repetition, suspension, we're also talking about time. And I remember in a conversation I had with the editors of the Capilano Review, Jacquelyn, Zong-Li, Ross, and Deanna Fong, they described these readings as being a particular kind of engagement with time, with attention, with distraction, maybe moments of boredom, but also reflection. And I really love that. The pieces I'm reading tonight are such an engagement. They make a demand of time in it and through it. As Kiel mentioned, that these pieces are part of a larger project called Grief Cycles 1, 2, 3. And I'm interested in this process of inscription and reiteration of subjects of grief. So in the project, loss is performed, repeated, and staged. And in the mechanical, repetitive simplicity of the subjects of grief, they're localized by these features of loss, even as they're undone by them. In the grief cycles, we see subjects, so you'll see in the poem multiple voices, an unnamed woman sleeping, a man passing by, a bird falling, an apple in its tree. All these subjects contest grief's gravitational pull. They're sometimes reduced to bodies colliding, slipping, decomposing. But these are also bodies that are precisely re-inscribed, enlivened even, by their cyclical iteration. So the nameless still responds to their name being called. The apple is in a state of suspension. The bird is rising, falling, but we do not see it hit the ground. So here we go. Répétez en attendant. Opens at 0 seconds, continues through each of the seconds to 1,133 seconds, whereupon it begins again. Follows through first sequence through second, and so on until reaches the last sequence for a total of 1,133 seconds, counting back to back, whereupon it starts new, or pauses indefinitely for a certain amount of time, that's still to be determined. Also to be determined whether to count anew or resume from last second of last sequence before recommencing. If the latter, the count will continue at 1,134 seconds plus or minus, allowing time to start new. Otherwise, starts again at 0 seconds. However long or short the matter of the pause, still undetermined, different slant of light across all sequences to be distinguished from the changing light down each sequence. This a matter of time, changing and endured within strict measurements, vertically down a single frame and laterally across all frames, A, B, C, respectively. Morning slant sliding into afternoon slant, sliding into evening slant for a duration exceeding strict time for a span of 7 hours or 420 minutes or 25,200 seconds, of which 1 morning hour and 5 afternoon hours and 1 evening hour are counted, plus or minus, allowing for difference in time when sun and darkness hit. This the same across all frames A, B, C, respectively. Further allowance to be given for time experienced differently by each thing in each frame, this exceeding 1 hour or 7 hours, regardless of strict time or duration. Repeat in its entirety until finished, or wait until that happens. Time soughing. Always wait for the next breeze to begin counting again. A small pause or a long pause puts welcome intermittence into the stretch of numbers. The trick is to count in time to that inner ticking, faceless, bodiless image of the infinite, I'm told. Caress of wind sometimes undoes that work, the 1,000-pricked sensation of feelings being born under a continuous skin, surprisingly tough considering the delicate flesh it holds, unsettling the work of the infinite. Countless, anyways. Knowing what counts when you have a limited time to do so is a suffering. The names for that time are only slight variations on the same thing, falling off at maturity, tending to fall off, the dropping of a part that is no longer needed, falling away after its purpose is finished. The sky is a miracle, and we are under the same sky. That's a thought that hurts me. There can be all the time in the world for something else elsewhere, I suppose. Here is different. That's why I count, even though it's a futile gesture, against an economy of trades between purpose and when that's over. That's why I love purposelessness. It staves time's yawning mouth, an open yes. It's a real aloneness, this exercise in counting, another way of unseeing time's offing, wondering whether it's also just an impending or a passing through, until we hit that mark when it's done, maturity, uselessness, finished. Terrorized thoughts, but no throat to open out its compendious cry. Childhood and youth are lost to something that must bear its own demise with a perpetual consciousness. I should be moved by the sameness of this fact. I am instead felt in by my ownness, my mere existence untouched by all the others who must also fall off, who are already tending to fall off, who will no longer be needed, whose purpose will be finished too. Whispered wishes around here, you can easily mistake them for the wind, says the same thing over and again, please. How simple our wishes are, really. Here's my own. It melts into that single chorus. Unspoken mention. Wandering forever, was it? Was the hardness of pavement below, thin-soled shoes, metronome of city traffic, keeping measure, was it? Was a measure of something having occurred or about to occur in this, the slow up, swell, or the blunt throb of the lines of cars, how they thin, then pool together again at the low hours and the high hours. Through this, keep walking, cutting a mostly parallel path, occasionally finding yourself in a stream of like people, walking too in a precise pattern of unspoken mention. School of Fish is a thought that briefly sits on your tongue but expires before you'd have let it out to no one in particular. Having remembered once, floating atop a warm body of ocean, the sudden sharp, steeled movement of 100 small-bodied fish passing in decided agreement to some place unknown to you, hovering above. Grief Cycle 1. To hope for, what is that? What is it to wait as you are waiting? Is this a hope for, or does it disappear into night's blackness without something else to hint it to? What did you think as you wait still again another night? Its blackness, the same wide sky, contracted into your tiny heart, your tiny hands, your tiny self, waiting between your siblings, one on each side of you, flanked by night and by these two sentinels of your worry and nightly misery, waiting for the parents you can't remember leaving, and when you awake in the bright light of another morning and find there, so you don't know when they left, and you don't know when they returned, and you can't be sure of having waited all that time until it's time to wait again, begin again. Begin again, neck stretched, craning, peering with eyes unmatched. For night's greater strength, looking out, expanse heavy, blanketed, indifferent. A child's heaving chest, heaving, then contracted, makes small, then grows itself. Big, helpless indifference of the night, helpless girl blanketed by night, flanked by siblings on either side of her, singing her nightly song, lulls her to sleep eventually. Morning hour. Awoke slowly, slow until sharp pierce of something inside. Meeting a heat lasting longer than remembered from the time of sleep. Dense ringing up and down the trunk, root down and hold still, something happening. Leafless density, naked fingers combing through. The different weight of the sky against coming spring. The uniform welt of winter easier to understand. Sink down, close up, sleep. the occasional footfall of birds, alighting, then lifting again, breaking tedium of the long season, inviting new sleep to come. Little to imagine in that snowy comfort, imagination running slowly in time. A ground lane quality compassed by thick intervals and gray sky, vast tracts of blank. Thrall. Pining words, pushed, pulled, sick, loving, slunk, low, hollow-chested, hearted words. Pushed, pulled words, sick, loving, slunk, low, hollow-chested, hearted, pining words. Sick words, loving, slunk, low, hollow-chested, hearted, pining, pushed, pulled words. Loving words, slunk, low, hollow-chested, hearted, pining, pushed, pulled, sick words. Slunk, low words, hollow-chested, hearted, pining, pushed, pulled, sick. Loving words. Hollow-chested words, hearted, pining, pushed, pulled, sick, loving, slunk, low words. Hearted words, pining, pushed, pulled, sick, loving, slunk, low, hollow-chested words. Dream. Awakened by the usual dream of the head snapped back, the head literally pressed against the skin of the back, a bare threading. This is the neck, the throat, and the pain. It feels so long, and the voice, that too is threadbare, asks, please pull it forward, won't you please? The way the dream ends, slides into a dulling, throws its blanket. Heavy over pain, no sharpness, no teeth. The way that pain is necked and back curled, through. Speak, mouth, teeth, lungs. Grief cycle 2. Needs night. Relieved sorrow. The interim between night and morning is the weight of another day spent. Afternoon hour. Bright red is the surprised tipped wing of a bird, a little bit of colored hope. See how the branches of tall trees make a complete horizon. Also, a synchronous hush of wind-spun leaves. Future space. There are writers I only read during the day. Camus is one of them. His is a kind of happiness you can really believe in without feeling duped. I like his wager against being nothing. He makes fine analogy, a man swimming in ocean much stronger than him. A man swimming in stronger ocean only says that much. You don't need to amass the image's meaning much more than that. There is also another one, but this one breaks me open a bit. Sometimes I clamp it down before feeling fingers, the inside part of my ribcage, placed nearest my lungs. It is the image of the boy against massive moving wind, running forward with an enormous palm branch in his arms, racing to some decided line in the future space against a friend who is doing the same. Evening hour. So in the last hour are small things, literal things, stones, sky, dirt, heat, wind, trees, lungs, teeth, mouth, red. Hunger-mouthed petition, too much, too little, searching for a counterweight to time's finish and purpose done. Whatsoever remains is future, for example, is an evening hour thought. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yoon Sook. That was really amazing. Thank you. If you want to hear more, read some of what Yoon Sook read just now, please pick up one of our new issues at the book table at the back. You can read more there. Thank you so much. I'm really excited to introduce our next reader. Francesca Bennett is a writer based in Vancouver. She is co-host with Ratna Dhaliwal of Sleep and Her Brother Death, a twice-monthly bootleg screening series from bed. And she is working on xʷməthkվəy, a 55-square-foot project space at 1469 Venables. Her text about Woojae Kim's recent exhibition at Dreams, Delta was the recipient of C Magazine's New Critics Award in 2023. Francesca, as a still new friend and yet someone who I already consider to be one of Vancouver's most committed, even if furtive, writers, I have to say I'm really excited to hear you read tonight. A few weeks ago, you wrote me in Kiel to let us know that you would be excerpting from 15 years of texts. I'm trying to look for a friend. Oh, there she is. 15 years of texts, and we were floored. What I appreciate most about your writing is its effervescence and precision, its sense of delight at the level of the word and the line, and its intellectual stepping and backstepping through readings, artworks, and encounters, through experiences of illness and epiphany, to get at what we know or what we think we know about ourselves. What results, I think, is a kind of spiraling, embodied citation that is as much about the craft of writing as it is about the craft of self-making. Welcome, Francesca.
I am invited to read for this dear friend's and I panic because as an artist, I came to art as a reader, and what readers do is they touch texts and texts touch them. And because those are the words of Francis Stark from a lecture on Robert Ryman, who we'll come back to, I panic because I am a reader before all else. When all else fails as home, I take a shower, Kimiko Han. And the small difference between think and touch, Morgan Parker. And does earth under the nail make the nail a claw? Hilary Leichter. And I panic because also it seems to me that all of my texts rely on images, by which I mean not just the artworks that I wish to write about or alongside, and which I gather together in a kind of broad pareidolia, similar to how my camera sees a face when I take a picture of a face, or a picture of a picture of a face, or equally of not a face at all. But I also mean that all of my texts rely on the text, italicization, parentheses, em dashes, that pause. And I pause because for the past year, I have been calling this series Dear Friends and, with a kind of pause after the and that is in literature, that wide opening em dash of non-disclosure, and also because, for the past year, I have been sitting on the Roy Kiyuka bench that is under a tree and above the ocean, reading poems alone, a year that is a mirror year of another year a decade ago, when I would sit on the Skszwx bench, reading poems alone. Except that this year and that year are separated by and a calling. But it is with this in mind that I reply. What an honor to be invited to such company. And in honor of Skszwx, whose pear tree bench I have returned to all year this year. And it was there, by the way, that I picked up Skszwx's Trans-Canada Letters a decade ago, and again while writing this. But this time, seeing me, it fell open to the page that begins, "You said you were terrified, but would come to read your." So, I accept with gratitude, thinking of all the names in every Artist Run Centre archives that only ever appeared once, and the ones that appeared for the first time, and on and on. And because I am une femme à un seul étage, avec sa cave dans son grenier, Gaston Bachelard, I have mostly touched some handfuls of images and texts by others, but that I call for all and forever, from here, the Grand Lux Hall, to elsewhere. But if you look elsewhere in the archives, you will also find me singing. And the singing came about because some 20 years ago, I was an artist, though not a painter. And that calling for me was not only in the singing, but also in a friend's reading of a black and white photograph from a few years later, a landscape that is also a self-portrait, and a portrait, the picture composed and the shutter snapped by my father, whose own name is the same as the field of waving speargrass in the foreground that rolls to a hill, with a horse, my father's horse, so Hryn Friedfinson's First Window or Sheep and Horses of my nephew on my mind, at one side in the mid-ground, and my father's child's body hanging over the horse's back, my arms and head hanging down in front, and my feet just visible, hanging down on the other side. The horse, Arrow, by the way, calm, his face in the grass, eating, and which portrait, self-portrait landscape I called untitled and, in parentheses, horse. But it was the gesture, not the horse, that was extracted from a painting I had seen, with a line of pack horses on a narrow trail, and the punctum, I thought at the time, crossing the very real boundary between photography and painting by the swift conflation of abstract thought, was the pack horse with a body as its burden, and because my body is a burden, I extracted this gesture of being wounded, at the very least because I didn't wish to play dead. And this photograph was published in the Art Schools magazine, along with an excerpt from a conversation with my friend Nicholas, his reading that made me believe, wherein he says, "I am thinking of your recent photographs of you hanging on various objects, such as the one of you laying across a horse. And I say, these recent photographs are studies for coming and going, for being somewhere and somewhere else, essentially for things being other things, through physical and conceptual connections." And he says, "You sometimes role play." And I say, I don't know if it is role play. I am very serious, and I am usually always myself. Myself, around that time, was interested in things for other things, documents, doubles, monuments, pairs, replacements, surprises, and surrogates, évidemment. And I was quickly losing my hold on that French language that I had grown up speaking, and maybe because of this, I was taken with the small difference between translation and translation, which is a difference of movement in space and movement in time. I contort myself to try to reach the present time that surrounds me, but I am still remote in relation to this very instant. Clarice Lispector as GH. And, or, with my mind I am hinged to the time I live in whether I like it or not. Pauses. Susan Sontag as Alice in bed. But if you're really interested, translation is a satellite, and translation, well, it's loss. But the two together are what the French call les faux amis, or false friends, which is not exactly the same thing as hearing Robert Filiu sing Qu'il est difficile d'aimer, qu'il est difficile, and hearing demain instead of d'aimer, which is tomorrow instead of to love. But I suppose it's a bit like how, although I say I was an artist and my friend Nicholas, what I want to tell you is that as collaborators, he and I made more than 100 small text works on white paper, in yellow paint, the yellow of my skin when I was young. And because we called these sketches for white flags, all had as their object or as their subject, surrender. So of course, one of these just said love. But I think I should clarify that it is because I recently saw the M- praised by Mary Shelley as that nameless mode of naming the unnameable that first left unspecified Frankenstein's creation, but which has now made space for us to call the man the monster, or the other way around, earth under the nail, etc. That when I say false friends, it is because no matter tomorrow and to love, I feel like I cannot count myself not only among the company of dear friends, but also not among the and. No matter that I am invited to read, I, the worst of all, must interrupt even this evening with self and doubt. Those twins, fear and terror, are as much of Hesiod's theogony as they are of my body, all 4.2 to 5.4 million per microliter. And it is this that I am thinking of, but also Yvonne Rayner's The Sun Comes Out, and Filiu's constant appreciation of the daily miracle, when I decide last year that this is the year that I will finally return to a practice. This year, when I don't yet know that the satellite of loss will cross my calendar again, in the same way that it did a few years ago. And in that other mirrored year, while waiting for something to happen but being granted a miracle instead, I wrote in my grandmother's agenda from 21 years earlier, simply because the days of the week matched, and because, like my grandmother, I find a use for everything, including the French that she didn't speak with me. And so I felt again her passing, by which I mean I started writing where her text stopped. And on the day of her death, I wrote of my own day, talked about the future. But this year, foreseeing nothing but planning for being in bed, I dreamt up Sleep and Her Brother Death, a twice-monthly bootleg screening series from bed co-hosted with my friend Ratna, the Atlantic to my Pacific. But now, that title is as much for, as it was from that same theogony. You know, the line that in translation goes, above an ancient inlet that the sun has been stopped from touching, they wrote this text from bed and dedicated it to their twin. And from Jessie Greengrass in Sight, when she says, I find it hard to imagine now what grief must have been like when that boundary, death, was a curtain you could put your hand through. And I find that I want to tell about the grief, but I decide to elide both my, and to insert great M dashes of non-disclosure instead. And I rewrite this to say that however many years ago, before I changed myself for the next 8 years, so forever, the last book that I borrowed from the library was How Should a Person Be? And in the same year, although before that reading, Nicholas invited me to make a solo exhibition at, recently renamed From, in the city of, where he was artist in residence at. and where we mailed our doubled postcards to and from for almost 2 years, which practice I wanted to take up again 2 years ago, when I finally, after almost 2 decades, visited Dia Beacon to see the works of Robert Ryman. Works that I had only dreamed from images and texts and conversations, mostly with Nicholas. But this many years later, I saw almost nothing, because after making my slow way through the temporary rooms, Charlotte Posenensky's Square Tubes Series D and DW, and the B-Wire of Melvin Edwards, I was only 2 minutes into the infinite Robert Ryman rooms when I understood that I was seeing these all-white works, their shapes and sizes and stretchers and hangers and layers of white paint with sudden tones of blue, of yellow, that yellow again, of blush, of noir, so difficult to see in sequence instead of in space. I understood that I was seeing these so-called white works with my body, and it, by which I mean my body, became a fountain. So I took it outside to the sculpture garden, which is a place where a fountain is at home. And where the echoes of Louise Lawler's bird calls made me laugh through my tears, hard enough to imagine that I was crying from laughing. But when I chanced it going back inside, and I saw instead of heard Mario Mertz, I found myself weeping again, and trying to find any transcendent way back out of the building or out of my body, I took a wrong or a right turn, and in the gift shop, without thinking, I picked out 2 of the same postcard, a single Robert Ryman painting, flattened between my fingers to its image and text, ready to airmail to Nicholas, wherever he lived now, with the glib line, "Wish you were here to laugh at how much I've been crying," which Nikki was a person, by the way, with whom I could bear any embarrassment, which is not why we were collaborators, but is why you'll find us in the archives singing. In his company, I felt, as I read Sarah Sheard once said of Roy Kiyuka, that he reshelved the crockery after a quake. And it is endurance and support that brings me back to the gesture, because less than a week ago, I found in my archives another reading of my photograph, the one of me laying across a horse. This photograph, I say in my notes, is from a series of studies exploring gesture as something to be endured or supported. And in parentheses, this idea draws particularly from notes on gesture, but its form in these studies derives from an anecdote about a method for taming wild horses. Rather than mounting the horse immediately to ride, laying across his back, and remaining there for hours at a time, could form a physical, spiritual, and emotional bond, while the horse would carry on. I suppose I'm suggesting that to cross a boundary is a matter of practice, or a practice. But évidemment, it's something that we can't reverse. But back to the gesture, by which I mean Nicholas's invitation to me to make a solo exhibition with him in the city where he was living. And by way of invitation, he sent me this excerpt from Alan Capro's Education of the Unartist. As in the childhood pastime telephone, in which friends in a circle whisper a few words into one ear after the other, only to hear them come out delightfully different when the last person says them aloud, the feedback loop is the model. He also sent a title that was not a question, but that is almost impossible to say otherwise. Where do smiles come from? And it is only now that I can call out Kate Soper's Ipse Dixit when, adapting Aristotle, she herself said it. Tragedy is the imitation of an action, not told, but performed. But at that time, because together we were interested in things that are almost other things. Choruses, correspondences, double entendres, echoes, jokes, uncertainties, and wordplay. I replied, where do smiles come from? Is this a question? A suggestion? A suggestion? A gesture? A jest? No, a jest. A jest suggests somewhere a gesture. The smile is a gesture that is a response to. That is a response to. The response to indicates a point of origin, coming from, found, where, somewhere. A point of origin found somewhere. Where? Why, right here or over there. The reciprocal gesture indicates an origin of communication, but smiles do not speak. When smiles speak, they laugh. I will make you laugh. The smile points, it is pointed, at one cheek and the other. Does the smile point at you too? Or does the smile point to you? Does it point you out? Almost touching and almost touching. Studies of feeling and fearing and failing. Outward gestures of inward smiles, or inward gestures for outward smiles. A smile anticipated as a response to an anticipated response? Is the gesture the origin? Is the gesture original? Do smiles share origins? Are smiles alike? Is the smile alike? Is it an as? It is almost. Does the smile come from the lack of the eye? Or from eyes? I am invited to read, and I smile. A surprise. But alone now with you, when I touch the text, my hand goes through. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Francesca. I smile back. So it's my pleasure to welcome our third and final reader of the evening. Zoe Imani Sharpe is a poet, editor, teacher, and workshop maker based in Toronto. Her writing embraces desire and intuition, the sensuality of aesthetics, lineage, loss and mourning, women's labor, and practices of vitality. Her recent collaborations include an exploration of life writing called Bout That Life, a workshop gathering disparate citational materials, What She Said, Promiscuous References and Disobedient Care, and the intersubjective text Power Baby with Claire Freeman Fawcett. She was the 2023 Poet in Residence at Gallery TPW, and you can find her recent work in YYZ Artist Outlet, Carte Blanche, and Best Canadian Poetry 2021. Zoe, I've been looking forward to meeting you in person since 2020, when Christian and I were both participants in the virtual workshop that you co-led with Fan Wu called Poetry Race Form. It was an extremely influential experience for me. And in following your work since then, across poetry, art writing, and facilitation, I've continued to learn from you. How language can operate as a Mobius strip, how to resist representation and turn towards the unintelligible, how to use myth to write about family and the self, and how the sentence can be a swerving line of thought. It's so special having you in Vancouver tonight, so join me in welcoming Zoe Imani Sharpe.
Okay, wow, there's a lot of you. Thank you so much, Kiel. That was really beautiful. And thank you to Jackie and to Catherine, to Deanna, to everyone at the Western Front and Capilano Review. You guys have been really gracious hosts. It's really, pretty special. And thank you all for coming. It's really nice to see some friends and meet lots of new people as well. I'm going to read a few sequences from this manuscript that I've been working on that's very much in process. The poems are kind of like revealing themselves to me through the course of time. And they all began as ekphrastic responses to various pieces of art, and then have kind of unfolded in different ways since. They're also very interested in the history of modernist architecture, and are kind of asking what the role of the architect is, the literal architect, but all of us as architects as well. And also thinking about how space sort of creates certain kinds of subjectivities and embodiments. Ground one. Sometimes I want a structure, desire to live by. Architects plot in, data-driven, hunted. Where else would we live is a question. Under what other dome are we apart and free to come and go? Shoved up into skybox, clouds, downy, visible, I raise the blind and gesture, feeling with my hand for rain. To replicate the shape one saw in a dream and have others step inside what Neptunian shell. Memory lifts below the purse of its subject, disfigured, the skin of my own structure, in the style of the time. Flesh in box, I carried violent language, abstract language, states perfection, my universal I want big words like a man, not doing what he does or he does, stars here and there in the blood like clotted jewel and risk. I wanted a place outside of time, no cops watching. When I learn what money is, I touch the silk paper. For years, I contemplate the carbon in a diamond. What materials cause this condition, part sensation? Commute to work in a structure of greed's making, the generous, onerous culture of ones of which I was removed and listening, lapping at what was echoed, what she made in that place across distance and echo to see through. We had been okay in the house, resting there or arguing, a sharp line of space untouchable like all soft media. The speaking figure destroyed, constructed again, gains symptom of visual flight. Light remains. All along the piss-stained carpet of modernism, pitched against the opulent house, alive with singing, crack aftermath, love networks, I in porous attachment. When I looked again, the houses were gone, my father gone, downloaded street, development's ease, a progressive folklore, who's versed in it? Here's a verse upon the threat of management. They only want to clean detonation. It's hard to hate the imaginary impulse to lie, as if symmetry could contain her or I. Dear planner, who plans your life with small amounts of listening to what you thought, a Snell, a diamond, mistaken for gated capital? Bleary-eyed, I walked to another place. I thought I could belong, speaking something new, with no clear exit by the light of the Our willingness, a deflection to be known, exuberant languages through walls of interior, to say nothing of exterior, walls, halls, all 20th century shit mattering. Within constructed, mostly race and hell, who owns a house and meaning? Wandering clues I come by reveal this mess can be torn, upended, each part of it. Hurts are nailed to pain, is crossing one beach to another, is the ambulatory movement of a mind. Figure 2. With respect to capture, not knowing if the tonal expresses divinity or machine, ideas of cutting and ideas of originary wholeness. A figure hovers over the light, or is the light poured finally from its jar? I'm drawn to angels, the winged creatures who pause to say, I am over there, but flattened. Do not call attention to what is most elegant in me, the cosmic music of 1975. No one wants to admit there is some danger as we tie our wrists together and salute what came. Air creature, night creature, wild scruples. What underpins the brush of real formal edges then rises to the sky, beheld by our scrutiny. The picture seems to say, dear gold grills of all drug-dealing uncles, and also something bad about the water. The water is bad and killing, elements made bad. I watch the mothers who no longer live with the illusion of individuation. The space between us then, a zone of uncertain appendage, blown out by the whir of skateboards and commerce, and set to dry on the wall as evidence. Two. Today I watched Pindell peel the falsity off her face, emulsify falsity. Then I recounted what was borrowed and never returned. The ignorant face dressed in a tight stocking, the mind moves across it in runs. The mind charts at sea on tremendous waters, in struggle with the elements that push against it, that cause it, God damn it, to sputter and bob and crash. And in the next room, the Ming Smith had its blurs on. I cowered at the quick cut, the long shadow of recalcitrance, but I too was the smartest and most ignored girl in a classroom. I listened closely, as if some part of the story would up and surprise me. A reversal of fortune, perhaps. I mean, perpetia or fold or gamble. My people were 8-ball people. They believed in fate. Three. I'm stunned by a shy girl who disappears into clubs, her camera in one hand, the other around the arm of her man. What she knows about motion. The arc of the backflip's long circumference had me no longer a girl. No longer a girl with all its comedic del arte, you know, banana peels, whiteface, tragedy, and men. Now I've got my back to it. Nothing was revived or affirmed, but floated, and certain blacks do what they wanna. It's the last one of this sequence. 4. It's like the instance of stumbling upon the writing of, say, that other person. Did you know her? Did you know that love has no reason? I won't speak in we's. I confess. I negotiated with time and it said no. The interval switched. I heard what she said, and she was not sullied or confused or ignorant. The dense winds gently opened her life. She wished for it to happen, and it did. The crowd gathered and separated. Sensing movement rather than stacking meaning, the crowd galloped. Now imagine a leporello. Imagine 2 leporellos, her soul extended. Who was she, my friend? I knew infinity then. She thought the comma was a feminine ending. Okay. I'm going to finish with sort of a last sequence from this manuscript. And it deals with, similar themes around sort of space and gender. But it takes a different approach. It's sort of the closest I can get to writing in prose. Desire structure. The assignment is to model a house or city made with paper. At one point, I get an F. The receded of me diffused along sea reeds in canary grass. A room opens onto another, as in Corbero, like the apartment complex I failed to represent as instructed. As if I arrived at the steps of the house at night, in total blackness of the city, not knowing what a house is or does. A right angle is or does, he mimes, effortlessly, in the temple of affect, that faux father figure, that fucker. The 1950s, what idealism, the arc of the backflip's long circumference. Drawing at the kitchen table, I attempt a straight line all the way through, no stopping, failing the actual shape of the bowl. If all else fails, mark making, then reading, to come upon this by Le Corbusier from a lecture at Vassar in 1937. Quote, after the lecture, there is a mob scene. They rush onto the platform and seize 5 or 6 large drawings I have just done. They rip them apart, tear them up, cut them into small pieces. Pens in hand, they cry, sign, sign. On the paper rest bananas, which curve like the handle of a wide mug, my wide mug of coffee, this morning, this carafe. What faces the same direction by chance? The neighbor's flesh, a sloping sea, I imagine. It is 5 a.m. in my apartment, and I imagine him sleeping, the wall a radio, his wide, boyish feet curled together where banana tips fuse. Later, at the coffee place again with its green sign I love, so vertiginous, taking off my shoe with the key in it. The problem of writing from distance, viciously concentrating, has something to do with the hubris of blueprints. Reason demolished, replaced with new reason. I read again and again the urgency of the poet's early books. Righteousness, naivete. An emotion's movement is ambulatory. When the stranger in the gallery calls my drawings melancholic, dreary, my arms lift in defense to just as soon dissolve, break. Then I became a figure of internal interruption. In fact or not, reason doesn't matter because what can reason do to me? What about borders with respect to death? About borders of truth and borders of property? We are going to wander about in the neighborhood of this question. That's Derrida. To enter the impasse. To endure an impasse implies one organization of time. That is, we are moving forward and something has blocked our path. A drawbridge has lifted. We must wait to cross the moat. Some signal pauses us like a streetlight. To find another way, there is none. If we reorient the scene and its perspective of the future as progressive, we begin to see the larger landscape. We move to the mountain and peer down its slope to recognize two small black dots at the base, facing one another. We cannot tell who is advancing toward who. Quote, a figure eight is what's known as a stopper knot, used in sailing and rock climbing to stop the rope from running out of its retaining device. Without it, the remaining rope would release itself into a pulley, and the climber would plunge down the mountain at high velocity. The knot stops this potential accident by looping a strand of itself back into itself, splicing then, and tightened when pulled in opposite directions, breaking the descent. We skirt the problem of definition by inserting its neighbor, negation. As we've tired of definition, see how much the world defines? 4 hills of purple, 2 of indigo, sloping upward, not bitter or paranoid, not sure or nice, not brave or bravado, not straight or carried, not magic nor magician, not dead nor unborn, not later, not yesterday or local. Step and gait and step, my left hip is a gorge, my right hip a knot. I step and step, but not. I climb, I trip, but not. I step, but not. I go not. I linger not. I go not. I go not. Thank you.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much, Zoe. Thank you, Yoon Sook. Thank you, Francesca. Thank you, Jonathan. Another round of applause for these incredible readers. If you enjoyed tonight's reading, please mark your calendars for the next event in the series on Thursday, July 4th. That's next month. That evening, we will be welcoming Elisa Ferrari alongside visiting authors Kai Kello and River Halen, both coming from Montreal. So we really look forward to sharing the invitation with you in the coming weeks. Also, if you enjoyed tonight's reading, please, again, consider supporting the Capilano Review. This is our beautiful new spring issue. It has Yoon Sook Cha's work in it. I'm suddenly feeling like I just want to read all of these incredible contributor names in here so you really know what this is because it's just so incredible. Iram, River Halen, Ashton Diddick, Benjamin DeBauer, S.K. Maston, Ami Harrow, Alice Notley, Daria Ake, Jonathan Alfaro, Marvin Luvualo Antonio, Liziana Lamelia, is Elizabeth McIntosh, Tanya Willard, Jashtej Ladu, Fred Waugh, Jerry Shikatani, Danny Carter, Henry Heavyshield, Susan Blight, Nicole Neidhart, Dylan Robinson, Woojae Kim, and tonight's Yoon Sook Cha. So please support the Capilano Review. It means so much to us. Keep it going. Come find me if you would like to chat about anything. And of course, Catherine will be at the book table. Thank you so much for coming and see you next month.